Right. We have started.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I am Laurel Hausch. I'm the Regional Vice President of Disclosure Source. And specifically, I share with local boards and also just real estate offices everywhere, things about the NHD that can not only help you with your seller and understanding what they need to do, but also for your buyer to keep you protected from lawsuits later, what you need to know and look at inside the NHD. Plus, I provide some nuggets on how you can build new business from the NHD. So hopefully in this allotment of time we have, I can share those things with you. I'm going to try to set my timer to stay to the course that we've got, Michael. And then if there are any questions, that'll be up to you if you want to, take those. Okay.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of today's meeting, we're going to look at the natural hazard that Disclosure Source provides. There are 2 pages that it starts with, which are maps. The first is the statutory or state map. The second are local maps. We provide local maps. This is kind of unique to only a few NHD companies because it does cost more money to provide local mapping, but it gives your seller a greater transparency to the buyer and the buyer more education on the parcel they're purchasing. For the purposes of the FHDS form that your seller might need to fill out based on where their parcel is, the statutory or the state map, that first map you'll see at the top, it says statutory, natural hazard disclosure, is the one that drives whether or not you're going to need to use the FHDS. The other thing that we wanted to do, if you look at those maps, I have that screenshot there, is we put a yes or no box. If it's in a zone, it's checked yes. If it's not, it's checked no. If there's no check mark in either box, that means they have not mapped it and there's no mapping available. So just know that. Also, if it's a yes, there's a red asterisk next to that box that asks you to go to the page that gives you more information on that disclosure and for your buyer to read that so that they understand what they're purchasing and what zones they fall in and what the implications might mean to them. So for the purposes of today, again, the statutory or state map is the one that's going to drive the FHDS form. Did it change to the next screen, Michael? Okay, great. So our report is docu-signable, and that's 1 page. It makes it super easy. Now, it used to be with your residential purchase agreement, links were not considered delivery, but they have changed that in the verbiage. Links are now considered delivery. So we've linked all the booklets, those EQ books, right there on that signing page where they can click on the live and interactive report and open that booklet and read it. So great way to help your seller our buyer to go and click on the link is just to, when you send this to them or review it with them, and you want to send them the report live and interactive, you can say, hey, there'll be some sleepless nights that you might have before you close escrow. It's just the way it is. Things are going through your mind about moving and so forth. So here's a little something to help you get to sleep. You got to read these booklets. And by the way, if you get the late night munchies, don't chew on the baseboards. They might have lead-based paint according to this one booklet. So that will, you can get your buyer to read over these little booklets and show that you have sent them to them through an email. The other thing that's nice about the report is that it's live and interactive. So let's say you've reviewed the report with your buyer or even your seller prior to getting a buyer in escrow, and they want to go back and look at a section of the report again. Well, there are summary pages that are listed right after the mapping and the AB 38 notice. So you can click on any one of those items. If it's in a zone, like for instance, if it was in a wildfire area and it said yes, you could click on that zone or that listed piece there, and then it will take you straight to that in the report instead of having to scroll through it. So we make it easy for you to find and review things with your buyer. Here is where we're going to spend most of our time this morning. Whoops. Well, my mouse is a little trigger happy there. Sorry about that. We're going to discuss the FHDS which is your fire hardening defensible space disclosure and addendum. It used to be an advisory, took that all out. They took all the verbiage out of the advisory and put it into the wildfire disaster advisory. I left the draft that CAR was before they finalized it. This is all of course in black ink in your WIN forms, but I left the red for the purposes of showing you what they changed last time, because everything in red is what they changed last time. This is going to change again, and we're going to discuss why. And that'll happen next year, January, but they'll send out a notice probably in November that it will be changing. So let's look at, I like to really break this thing down and make it super simple to understand and explain to your seller, because when the seller gets this, they're going to be like, what? How do I fill this thing out? This is very confusing. So here's how it's easy to explain this form. In 1A, it tells you the law applicability. So who is going to be required to use the FHDS form, the fire hardening form, and provide that to a buyer? 1A, number 1 in 1A is the property contains 1 to 4 units. Now that includes, those are residences, that is townhomes, mobile homes, mobiles and parks, condos, and residential units. So all of that applies to residential units. So yes, if it's a townhome or a condo, it's very likely that their association has done the fire hardening around their parcel, and they can get their certificate if required, if they're in a certain area, but they still must disclose in this form if they are residential 1 to 4 units. Number 2, the seller is required to complete a real estate transfer disclosure statement. So here's the deal. If your seller's not filling out a TDS, there is no way they can fill out this form. It's way too complicated. So if they're not filling out a TDS, then they're going to provide the wildfire disaster advisory for sure. But we're seeing that in almost every transaction right now. I don't know about you guys, but that's what I'm hearing. So if you by chance look at the NHD and you see on the statutory map that the parcel is in a fire zone that's high or very high right now, or a wildland fire area that's high or very high, and you don't receive this form, it's probably most likely because there's no TDS. If there is a TDS and it's residential 1 to 4 units, not bare land, then you may need to talk to the listing agent and say, hey, where's the FHDS form? We need to have that, because some agents are not staying up on their forms. Sometimes they forget or they don't use a TC. So just know that you need to have this form in the transaction if these laws apply. So we've got the residential 1 to 4 units, the TDS is being filled out. Number 3, and this is, the biggest one, the property is located in a high or very high fire severity zone. That includes wildland fire areas and what they call just high fire severity and very high severity zones. Number 4 on this law applicability really only applies to paragraph 2. So it gets a little confusing because it says in number 4, the improvements on the property were constructed before January 1st of 2010. You might say, my home was built in 2018. I don't have to fill out the form. No, you do have to. You just don't have to fill out paragraph 2, because if you read on, it says if any of these 4 conditions is not met, seller does not have to answer the questions in paragraph 2B. So 2B on this form, the one that's mostly in black with the yes and no check boxes, is for sellers whose homes were built prior to January 1st of 2010. I have a home, let's say, that was built in 2018. I've got to fill this form out if I'm in a high or very high severity zone and I'm filling out a TDS and it's residential 1 to 4 units, but I don't have to fill out paragraph 2. That's what that's about. So understand that your seller, every home in a high or very high severity zone that's filling out a TDS must fill out this form if it's a residential 1 to 4 unit. Just they're pardoned on paragraph 2. Let's talk about paragraph 2, and I'm going to pick on Michael. He's got his mute on, but I'll ask him anyway. Hey, Michael, is your eave soffit and roof ventilation in excess of 1/8 of an inch and not flame or ember resistant?
No idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. And that's what I hear from constantly from agents. So that first question, notice how it says in 2B, fire hardening vulnerabilities. This paragraph explains to a buyer, hey, I live in a fire zone and my home is older, and these are things that might be problematic that could cause my house to be more likely to catch on fire should there be a wildfire in the area. So let me just tell you what exists here. And so the seller can check the boxes, but notice how it says, are you, seller, aware of the following features that may make your home more vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers? So if you don't know the answer, you're not aware. And does it require you go do an investigation, climb on a ladder, measure the eave soffit and roof? Nope. So that's eave soffits and roof ventilation. Sometimes you see those holes that are up in the eaves of under, you go up under the gutter system up when you're walking up to a house. That's just air ventilation for a house, but older homes maybe don't have what they need to have behind that, which is super fine mesh metal that protects embers from, because if there's a wildfire somewhere, embers can actually travel over a mile in the air. They travel like this and they can get in that attic and cause it to catch on fire. So that's the question. So the answer would be, if I know, and how would I know the answer to that? Well, maybe I recently had a roof inspection. Maybe your seller got some inspections done. They know they need a new roof, or they know they need to bring some things up to current codes, and they've decided to just sell it as is, or they're going to disclose that. They might know, but in most cases, your seller's going to check no, which means I don't know, I'm not aware. But no can also mean no, it doesn't exist on this form, because, hey, Michael, your roof coverings, are they made of untreated wood shingles or wood shakes?
Oh, no.
So you know what kind of roof you have.
Yeah.
So you either have a comp, a tile, a flat gravel tar roof, you got different options. But if you have a wood shingle or wood shake roof, you might most likely know it. And if you know you do, you'd have to check the box yes. But if it's not one, you know it's not, so you check the box no. But in most cases on this section 2, the answer is going to be no for not aware, because a lot of homeowners do not know the answer, especially like number 3, combustible landscaping or other materials within 5 feet of the home or under the footprint of any attached deck. Because you have hardening if you live in a fire zone that's high or very high, that is 100 feet from all sides of the structure. 5 feet is pretty hardcore hardening, mitigating fire, getting rid of wood piles and debris and dead plants and trees that are up too close to the house with their boughs hanging over the roof line and so forth. And then you've got 30 feet that you really have to, and I'm going to show you where you can take your seller for that information. And then another 70 out or to the property line to protect your home from wildfire. So all of these questions in paragraph 2 are just basically letting a buyer know, hey, these exist because my home is older and they may be problematic, or I don't know if they exist. So I'm going to say, no, I don't know. But again, this paragraph section 2 is only filled out by sellers who must fill this form out according to the law. They're in high or very high residential 1 to 4 units, filling out a TDS. And then this section is the homes that were built prior to January 1st of 2010. Okay, so moving on. The next section is the defensible space disclosure and addendum. This part of the form is where the rubber hits the road. This is where negotiations happen between a buyer and a seller. This is where a seller tells a buyer several different things. Could be, hey, I live in a local vegetation management zone that requires that I do things to protect my parcel, and they come around and check on it annually. And I get a notice and I get a certificate that I've done well. Or no, I don't live in one of those zones. Or I don't check anything because I don't know if I do or don't. But for the most part, sellers know, because sellers have had CAL FIRE come by if they live in a vegetation management zone that's local, the local jurisdiction protects and monitors. And I know that because I've had lots of agents who live in one. When I teach this class, and yep, they come by every year, check our parcel, and give us a certificate, or they leave us a sheet that tells us, hey, these are the things you need to do to get things in order for your parcel to be protected. And then they come back and check. So this is where the seller lets a buyer know, yes, I do, and I'm going to get you that form. I've got it done. Or if you look at 3C, where I've got that blue arrow pointed there at the bottom, this is where the buyer and the seller come to an agreement regarding who's going to obtain the compliance with the state or local defensible space requirements. So here's how I would explain fire hardening to someone in a high fire zone or very high fire zone. When you get on the freeway, everybody knows the law. We know how we're supposed to drive. You took training, but does everybody drive the way they're supposed to on the freeway? No. So everybody who owns in fire zones is supposed to do certain things to protect their home, protect their neighbor's home, to help the fire department be able to get down the road and so forth. Does everybody do it? No. But when do you see people driving the correct speed limit and being all careful and using their turn signals? When you see those little black and white cars sitting on the side of the road with their radar guns out, or you have one driving down the road with you, because that's kind of like consider local vegetation management ordinance, where you got somebody watchdog in the area. So you're going to have areas where there's no fire department that's coming by annually. And you've got areas that monitor it annually and give certificates and so forth. Both are still supposed to harden and protect their property, but one is more watchdogged. And so those are the ones that are a little bit more challenging when you sell. So now here's where your seller gets to tell the buyer who's taking responsibility. If you see on the next page 2 checked, section 2 or box 2, it's the buyer responsibility. There's a local vegetation management ordinance in effect, which requires compliance as a result of sale of the property. You're not going to see this that often because we just don't have that many areas that are a result of sale. Truckee, Paradise, result of sale. You got to have it done to close escrow. This one actually lets the buyer take it on, but in those 2 areas, they won't let you close escrow without it. So it might be a situation where the buyer's willing to comply because they're buying something where the seller has moved out and doesn't want to do anything, and they're giving them the allowance to do so. But it's very rare that you're going to see box 2 checked. Okay. Box 3, on the other hand, is the one you're going to see a lot more. It'll be checked all day long because sellers just don't want to bother. If they're in a vegetation management ordinance that does not require compliance as a result of sale of the property. And you'll notice this box allows the buyer up to a year after close of escrow to obtain compliance. Well, if your insurance person is on this Zoom call, they'll tell you they're not getting a year. I have tons of agents that have told me that their buyer moved in. They didn't even have enough time to get all the vegetation, the trees trimmed and so forth before their insurance came by, looked at their parcel and said, we're canceling your fire insurance. You are not protected. You do not have your parcel protected from fire. So in this box also, when you see this box checked as a buyer's agent, it's going to send up some red flags. This is where you're going to want to have a discussion with your buyer. There are lawsuits going on right now over this because the buyer had no idea that they had $10, $20, $30,000 in tree removal and tree trimming that needed to be done. Plus cleaning out the gutters, cleaning off the roof, cleaning out all the dead debris, mowing down the grasses and so forth. So there's a lot there when you see that box checked that would open up responsibility. The buyer says, I'll take on that responsibility and that cost. So that's where negotiation comes in. If potentially your buyer wants to move forward, or you at least need to have that discussion with them, probably in writing. Now, the next portion is where the seller is taking the responsibility in a local vegetation management ordinance area, and they are going to give the buyer the document, the final document. The kicker is CalFire usually comes around once a year. It's like annually, but your certificate is only good for 6 months. So if they have a certificate and it's 8 months old, they've got to get CalFire back out there to get a current certificate. The next box is if their state or local compliance is already completed and they've got it and it's less than 6 months old, then they can check that box. The box before is they're getting the compliance, and they'll give it to the buyer before close of escrow. The next box below that, number 6, is the seller responsibility agreement to obtain state compliance. And it's like basically they promise that they will deliver it to the buyer prior to the time of the final verification of condition. So it's a state area, not a local. The first box 4 is local. Box 5 is state or local that they haven't done yet, but they're working on, or no, that I'm sorry, box 5 is that they have it. The one before is they're getting it. And then box 5 or 6 is seller responsibility agreement to obtain state compliance, that they're going to do it before the buyer's final verification of condition. And then if they have, it's been done, but they don't have a copy of it, they can say where the copy is being held at the fire department that did that. And then they can reach out to that department to get a copy of it. So this basically is how a seller tells a buyer what they have or have not done in a fire zone to protect their home and who's going to take on the responsibility. That's basically what this form is. And it's going to protect your seller. It's going to protect you as the listing agent. It's going to protect your buyer with education on knowing what they're taking on, and the buyer's agent as well, to have that, serious conversation. Now, if you don't receive this form, I'm going to pull this over here, but you do receive the wildfire disaster advisory. And it, here's the thing, this is kind of, the waters are a little mucky now, because this is going into every file, whether you're in a fire zone or not. I don't know if you've seen it, Michael, and other agents, but I hear it's being used in every transaction.
Yeah.
So sometimes when something's being used lots, you don't see it as like any big deal. It's just another advisory. But if you look at the natural hazard and you see the parcel is in a high or very high severity zone, wildland or high fire, either one, and you don't receive the FHDS form we just discussed, but you do get the wildfire disaster advisory, then that means that the buyer is going to be taking on that responsibility. Unless the seller also just happened to have the certificate. And you might think, well, that's not fair for the seller to do that. Well, you've got sellers who maybe did their TDS, but they're elderly, they have dementia, they can't fill out this form, or you've got sellers selling a probate sale, or you got lots of reasons where they're not going to fill this form out that are out there because they're gone from the house maybe. And then, but a buyer still needs to understand what they're purchasing in a zone that they're purchasing and what the responsibilities are. So if you do see that they're in a high severity zone on the NHD, then be sure to review with your buyer the wildfire disaster advisory, because it takes them to CalFire, shows them what they require for parcels. And, really it's a serious conversation that you're going to want to have with your buyer. Hey, Michael, I noticed there's some chats. I don't know if there's anything in the chat question.
Yeah, I was about to interrupt you.
Okay.
One of them, let's see. Tracy asks, I know San Mateo requires a certificate from the fire department. What other areas require something like that? And how can you find out?
So good question. Thank you for asking, Tracy, I think it was. Different areas, I mean, I couldn't possibly know. I train all over Northern California. I couldn't know every zone and who, but there are local vegetation management zones. Most sellers who live in their home for any period of time, more than 2 years or a year, would know if they're in one, because CalFire's come by and left them a sheet. I wonder if I have one of those. I don't think I have it on me right this minute, but they leave a sheet by that is a check sheet of what you need to have done, or if you passed it. It's a big yellow and orange sheet. And if you did pass, they'll give you a certificate, which is good for 6 months. I know El Dorado Hills, Cameron Park, Placerville, going up that corridor there, all in the city limits, up into Tahoe, all have vegetation management zones that are local where the local fire department takes responsibility. When I talk to the fire department, there are so many areas that are crossover state responsibility areas and federal responsibility areas with local, and they want to protect those. So if there is a wildfire, they'll get out and help fight fires with local departments, just because they want to make sure that it doesn't spread into the areas that they are defending if it's close to that. I wanted to, but I'm sorry, I can't tell you every seller's, whether they're in a vegetation management zone or not, but they should be able to find that out from the fire department. And I'm going to show you where they can find out. Okay. So we provide some easy nuggets for you to get that information. I wanted to share with you before I move on to that piece of it.
We have another question too in your.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
What happens if a seller, this is from Shelley, oops. What happens if a seller who is selling on their own doesn't provide the form? What's the liability to either the seller or buyer? That wasn't the next question, but Neil snuck that one in.
So, okay, are you saying a for sale by owner?
Right. Let's say I don't have the benefit of an experienced real estate agent and I sell my house and I don't do this. Or I have not a good real estate agent and I sell my house and I don't do this. What happens? Is it,
That's a really good question too, because we know in real estate, there are reasons why you hire an agent. I would reach out to people and say, hey, there's a reason you're using me. And probably the number one reason is to stay out of court, because I can help you make sure that you have all the disclosures required by law that a seller needs to provide to a buyer. And one of them is this: if a seller sells their home without an agent, without the correct documentation, a buyer could come back at that seller and sue them over not disclosing this information. And it could be tens of thousands of dollars. Number one, well, obviously they know they're in a fire zone because number one, it's going to be on the NHD, and any seller selling their home, their parcel, whatever, is required to provide a natural hazard disclosure to the buyer. That's by law. So a buyer is going to see the fire zones if they read it, and they're signing the report that they know that they're buying in a fire zone area or a fire area. And they're going to know probably if they have a loan, because they're getting fire insurance unless they're self-insuring and don't have a loan on the property. So layer on a seller does not disclose these things, and they close escrow, and now the buyer finds out they have to do all these different things to get their home protected from wildfire that are required because they live in a vegetation management zone. They could come back at that seller and sue them over that for not disclosing that, for sure. That's what this FHDS form does for a seller, is it discloses all of that and also discloses who they're giving the responsibility to, or if they've taken it on and they're complying and they've provided all that documentation to the buyer. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I would put it, if you don't comply, the options are, you could be sued for monetary damages, and under certain circumstances, they can rescind the contract and, give you your money back. And those are the two common, if you violate any of these laws.
Correct. Shelley asked about 3C. How do we know if it's a point of sale?
Yeah.
Does CAL FIRE let us know when we have the inspection? No, CAL FIRE doesn't know any of this stuff. This is real estate related. So they're just going to tell you about hardening your property, doing it right, what you need to do to get protected, and then give you a cert if you're in a vegetation management zone. That's a good question too, Shelley. Point of sale, you won't be able to close escrow. The escrow officer will tell you, hey, you have to have this documentation. We can't close without it. I only know in Northern California, I know there's a couple little areas in SoCal, but I don't work that area. In NorCal, Paradise and Truckee. That's all I know that's a point of sale. Otherwise, you can give it off to the buyer. Okay. And then we talked about if a buyer is selling on their own. There's
a screen froze. We did that one. Carlos, who's our insurance guy, is on and is offered something related to that. We're going to give Carlos a chance to talk unless he wants to do it while we're doing.
Well, let's continue on, and then I know
Finish
Carlos is going to speak after, because I don't want to
Yeah.
get too much off topic, because there's several things that, and maybe you could look at the chat while I finish up this
I'll
part.
do that. I'll do that. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're looking at this. I just wanted to take a screenshot and show you this. Anybody can go here. This is CAL FIRE's mapping. They update it constantly. You can hover over the binoculars right here. And if you do so, and I'd be happy after we're done to show you a live, I can share my screen on the live version, but this is just a screenshot. Whoops, so sorry. This mouse is so sensitive. So take a look at this. And reason I wanted to show you this is you've got, you know, high and very high severity zones. You can see the colors are kind of a pinkish and an orangish, and then you've got yellow, which is moderate, and you've got state, local responsibility areas, state responsibility areas, and federal responsibility areas. Notice the moderate color. There's quite a bit of it. And if you hone in your area, you will see, I can show you later, moderate is going to be added in 2024. And that's going to open up a lot more disclosures for homeowners out there, just FYI. So be prepared for that. I think part of the question that you had earlier about finding out if they're in a vegetation management zone that is local and provides, you know, that certificate. So when we provide you the NHD and it's, and you see that it's in a fire zone that requires, I'm trying to pull us out of the way here, on our AB 38 page, we provide you a link to CAL FIRE inspection to schedule your defensible space inspection. So if you are a seller and you want to get your parcel ready and you want to get that certificate to provide it to a buyer, you click on this link, it will take you to the mothership. You don't want to call the local fire department to schedule your inspection. It could be 3 or 4 weeks before they can call you back. They're busy. They have a lot they do. They don't just, you know, they put out fires, wildfires, but also home fires and all kinds of other stuff, right? And so what you want to do as a seller, if you want to get this inspection, or if you want to find out if you need to get one, you click on the link, it opens up their website. It asks for all the seller's documentation, name, address, email, all of it. And it will send to the seller, hey, we've scheduled your inspection on this day at this time, or there's no inspection needed. You're not in a fire zone that requires it. So if your seller is wondering if they should, they can click on this link and it will allow them to schedule their inspection. At the bottom of this page, and let me pull this sidebar over, is a link to the CAL FIRE Defensible Space site, which shows them exactly what they're looking for. They have lists, they have maps, they have videos on there. It shows you how to harden your property and get it prepared. So that's a really good site for a seller to go to as well if they need to understand what CAL FIRE is looking for. And by the way, CAL FIRE is, they are, every time I have them come speak at a board for me, they are amazing. They want to help people. They're not mean about it. They're not trying to find people. These guys aren't like the guys on the freeway giving you a ticket. They want, because they are so glad that people want to harden their property, that they want to help you. But they, you know, you might have a bunch of trees that need to be removed. Well, they can't do that for you necessarily. Maybe you could get PG&E or SMUD if they're close to their lines. But also, FYI, some of CAL FIRE's jurisdictions have monies to help people who are indigent to harden their property, and you can research that as well. But a lot of times that money is gone at the beginning of the year. It goes very quickly, by the way. So here's a question for you. Who can schedule this inspection? Can a buyer's agent or a buyer? Nope, because according to your residential purchase agreement, that's a government inspection and you cannot schedule government inspections unless the seller does so or gives you written permission. They don't, CAL FIRE doesn't want to go to a property and walk on a property and they've got a dog that might bite them because they don't know they're coming. or they've got things they haven't done yet. CAL FIRE does not want to step on a property that a seller doesn't know that they're coming there and has approved it. So you're going to need to negotiate with the seller to allow that. If they haven't done so, get written permission from them if you want to schedule it. And if you want to see how many trees need to be trimmed up and how many trees need to be removed and so forth, and the other things you need to do to harden the property, FYI. Any questions on that? You're muted, Michael.
Wouldn't it be a best practice if you were listing a property to get this done before you put it on the market?
Oh, that would be brilliant. But hey, you know, so I would talk to my seller and say, let's get this NHD order. We don't charge you unless you close escrow, disclosure source. So you can order it up, see if you're in a fire zone that needs to get going on it. There's a lot of other things inside this report that can help, greatly help. I'm going to show you one right now. And so, you know, just get in front of the 8-ball. It's really good. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. So if you look at this sample page that I put here, I'm going to try to pull the sidebar over a little bit here. This home, this particular map, statutory map, is, in a fires, a wildland fire area. The green X's are wildland fire. They apply to the FHDS form, as well as the green lines are the very high severity zone and the mapping. But they also touch a FEMA flood area. So they're in a fire and a flood area. Double whammy on insurance, right? And I've had people that have told me they have, you know, both those insurances, which it seems kind of crazy, right? But that happens sometimes when you have the topography and maybe you've got a little creek running down below your property, but you're also in a very wooded area. So that can happen. So what we do every time you order a natural hazard from Disclosure Source is we order you a flood cert, and it's attached to the NHD. And why is that a great thing? And like Michael said, ordering it up front, you could even attach your NHD to your MLS listing. So agents could look at it and go, oh, no, we can't make an offer on this. It's in a high fire zone and you can't afford fire insurance. You're squeaking in this property at this price, or you can't afford flood insurance. But if you look at the flood cert, sometimes you'll see that they've had a LOMAC, a letter map of change. See that little black dot there that says yes on the far right here? That means that they've had an elevation survey. And this will show whether or not they have either wiped out or greatly reduced their flood insurance. Because maybe it's a creek like my neighbor had behind his house. He built on 2 wings to the back of his house. He had to have an elevation survey to do so. He was in a FEMA mapped area and paid for flood insurance. He got that elevation survey and wiped out his need for flood insurance. It was $2,600 for his elevation, because that was a build. It might have been a little more expensive because he had to have it done for a build. But having this is a really nice key to helping a buyer know, hey, you don't need the very high expensive flood insurance because you're not in an area that will probably flood, or the potential is very, very low based on your elevation survey, or it wiped it out completely. So we attach that to every NHD that you order that falls in a FEMA mapped area. Okay. Good to know, right? And we also provide a mudslide debris flow advisory, because that's kind of on people's minds right now, because there's been a few of those lately. And so that's inside the report, and your buyer can go there and look at the key coding mapping and see where the state has mapped where there are potential hazards that could happen. We also provide an environmental report in every report, and this is for greater protection, and most buyers want to see this. And so that's included at no additional cost. It comes with our report for $99. And we provide this nugget, which I think is a great thing. So let's pick on Michael again, unless somebody wants to turn their camera on and say hi, and I could pick on that person. So Michael, when you've done real estate for a hot minute, right?
Mm.
Okay. Have you had a buyer call you 6 months after close of escrow and say, what is this tax bill? I thought we paid our taxes with our house payment.
A couple times.
Yeah. I hear it happens a lot.
Yeah.
Well, why not use this as an opportunity to get more business? So inside the natural hazard, because we also provide you with a tax section that tells the current taxes of the property, what the Melleroos are, if they have a PACE loan, Hero, White Green, one of those pesky loans that's a tax lien but has to be paid off. there's nobody, no lender will take second position on that. So I also have a script for that if you'd like it. So inside this tax estimator, because we already know what the taxes are right now, what the current supplemental, value tax assessment is. So you simply type in the sale price in the top, and then you click the month that you're closing in the one of these two sections, and it will automatically calculate that supplemental tax bill for your buyer. So let's say it's going to be $2,879 because the buyer's taxes were here and you're buying it here. And there's a difference called the supplemental tax, and that's billed to escrow. Sometimes the lender will pay some of it into the escrow account. And then what'll happen is sometimes escrow will true up the account. You get a rebate check, woohoo, from your escrow account. And you don't realize that rebate was to pay that bill. And then you get the supplemental tax bill. So here's a great way to help you get repeat business. When you're talking to your client, do the math with them in the supplemental tax estimator that's made for you, and then tell them, Michael, I'm going to call you in 2 or 3 months, and I'm going to remind you about this, because you know what? Nobody likes to get an unexpected bill, and I don't want it to come to you unexpectedly. I'm going to call and remind you. I'm going to put that on my calendar right now. And then in 3 months or so, you call your closing, your buyer, and you say, hey, I've been thinking about you. How's it going? You have that fluid conversation. I basically wrote up a little script for you. If you'd like it, I'm happy to, whoops, man, this thing is like so sensitive. I'll send it to Michael. I'll send both the scripts to you if you'd like. The other one is on the PACE loans. That's a script you could call your entire database about. Anybody ever had a close with a house with a PACE loan on it, or a Hero or a White Green? Yeah, tell us how fun it was.
Well, yes, the issue is that it had to be paid off before escrow could close, and the seller didn't have any money. And you can't pay it off with the closing because it has to be paid off before the lender would fund. And so the buyer ended up paying it off,
Wow.
but not happy. And
so did the seller negotiate the price down?
yes, it was reflected in the price.
Okay.
That means over and above what was going into escrow for a down payment and closing costs, they also paid off the PACE loan.
Wow. So why not? Because I've seen where a buyer gets a PACE loan. I'm not a buyer, a homeowner, and it's for windows, let's say. And they end up paying $18,000 for new windows when they should have paid probably about 10. But because they got this type of government-backed loan, not the best interest rate, not the greatest, they end up, these sellers, these window companies or the roofing companies, heat and air companies, solar companies, they know they can take them to the cleaners on the price. And because they finance it out for 20 years, it looks really, oh, that's not very much, $150 a month. But they end up, if they pay on it for 20 years, paying $100 grand for those $18,000 windows. So I've done all the math on that, and I'd be happy to send you the script that I wrote on it. There is a better way to do home improvements, and really to do the math on solar, because solar, you have to know that you're going to recoup your money in a certain time period for it to be reasonable. And many people think that they're going to, oh, they're going to save so much money. But if they're not going to live in that house for a certain period of time, they're not going to recoup how much they spend on solar. So anyway, I'd be happy to send to Michael both of those scripts. And, if you can use them if you'd like to get repeat business, because at the end of any conversation, you always want to say, oh, by the way, who do you know who could use my services? Another suggestion I have for you, and if you have not done this, I would highly recommend, get your phone, create yourself as a contact in your phone. Now, you're not going to call yourself. Put everything you'd want a buyer or seller, potential client to get from you. Your email, your website, of course, your phone number, your office phone number if it's different from your cell phone. But behind your first name, put realtor. I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to a neighbor or someone that I met, and they're telling me, oh, they're buying a house or they're selling a house. And I'm like, oh, who's your realtor? They can't remember their name. So how could they refer you out to their coworker if they can't remember your name? But if they see in your contact realtor, they'll know, oh, hang on, let me search for, oh, here it is. It's Michael.devlin. He's awesome. So if you put your picture in there, don't forget your picture, and behind your last name, put your DRE number maybe, or somewhere in there you need your DRE number. But keep that as a contact and then say, do you have my digital contact? Let me send that to you. And you can just share your contact so they can save you in the phone. And that's a really good thing to have when you're calling them, because it makes it super easy for them to forward your information and share who you are to help. And that's the best referral at all, someone who loved you and that thinks you're a great realtor. So just very quickly, because it's important to me. Did you know that the civil code mandates that sellers and their agents exercise good faith in picking their natural hazard disclosure company? We're not regulated. NHD companies are not regulated. Is that crazy? I wish they would regulate us, but we're not. So until that day, Disclosure Source is owned by Fidelity. We're a Fortune 500 company. We don't exclude protecting you in our fine print. We protect all parties, your transaction coordinator, your broker, you, the agent, the escrow officer, all. If we make a mistake, we're going to stand behind our report and make it right. So it matters who you use for your natural hazards. You want a company that's going to stand behind you, and that is Disclosure Source. There is no one who comes close to our protection. So we'd love to have your business. Margaret and I really appreciate you inviting us today. And I want to hear what your insurance guy has to say. That's always good to hear right now. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, thanks very much. Everybody's been given copies of your contact information and anyhow, and let's see if we can get Carlos to show his camera and unmute himself. There we go.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
All right, so I want to introduce Carlos Copeland with Farmers Insurance, a man who's always on fire. Well, anyhow, who's going to talk to us about the other shoe that needs to drop, and we're talking about wildfires. So why don't you go ahead and take it from here? Tell us who you are and what do you have to say about this?
So hi, my name is Carlos Copeland. I've been with Farmers Insurance going on 20 years. My father started a Farmers Insurance agency in Morgan Hill in 1974, and we've been in this community ever since. There's definitely been a lot of changes to the homeowners insurance industry. I'm sure you guys have been watching the news. A lot of insurance companies are pulling out. The biggest fear I have is the move that State Farm just made by halting all new business on fire, commercial auto, and commercial buildings. State Farm is the largest insurance carrier in the state of California. So when they make a move like that, the other providers tend to follow. So I'm very concerned with the market coming up. Thankfully, I'm still able to write. I do have the ability to broker out and go through California Fair Plan, so I still have an option for individuals in those high risk areas, but it is definitely a concern to the insurance companies at this moment, and making sure that you have a defensible fire space, your roof's taken care of, you don't have exposed wood siding, all those preventative measures that you guys are discussing are very important right now. I do feel that also with the amount of rain that we just got, and the fact that we've been in a drought for such a long time, we haven't really been out maintaining our yards. So going out and taking care of that right now is going to be huge, especially after all that rain we got. The vegetation is going to blow up, and the amount of, they call it ladder fuel, when the fuel gets high enough off the ground to where it gets into the trees, that's a huge problem. And I do feel that all the rain that we've gotten and the wildfires opening up all the land for more vegetation to grow is probably a huge reason why State Farm decided to pull out. So I mean, if you guys have any questions, or if there's any concerns, or if you just want to look up a homeowner's rate in a specific area, I'm gladly able to help you guys. I'm open to questions.
Mute myself. Let me ask you this: is there a certain So if it's in a moderate high fire zone or a high fire zone or a very high fire zone, where's the cutoff when insurance starts to say we're out, you know?
Okay, so there's two programs that we use. We use one that's been around for a long time called your protection class. That's your distance from the fire hydrant and your distance from the fire department. They typically want you to be within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant and within 5 miles of a fire department. If you're over that 5 mile mark, you start to become uninsurable with the preferred carriers. Then we're gonna have to search outside, broker things out, and look at California Fair Plan. The second one is gonna be the one that we're all familiar with. It's the fire line score. That is the fuel and the slope around your property. So that's the big one that's come into play. The homeowners insurance companies really don't want to touch anything over I think it's a fire line score 3. So anything over a fire line score 3, the preferred insurance carriers don't want to touch it, and you'll have to go source it out with probably California Fair Plan, which requires a companion policy to go along with it.
Okay, so could you just give a brief description maybe of the FAIR Plan?
So the Fair Plan, yeah, absolutely. So the FAIR Plan is going to cover basic things. It's going to cover fire, lightning, internal explosion, wind, storm, hail, riot, or civil commotion. All the other things like theft, falling objects, snow, accidental freezing or discharge from an appliance, liability, other structures, additional living expenses, all that stuff would be covered under a companion policy. So it's very important that you put those two together. Do you have to have them both? In some cases, I've seen lenders allow just the FAIR Plan, but now that they're aware of the companion policy, I do see a lot of lenders and mortgage companies requiring both the FAIR Plan and the companion policy. And if they're in a flood zone, obviously a flood policy.
Laurel asks if the insurance companies would reduce the cost of fire insurance if you've already done the fire hardening of the parcel.
There has been cases. I have worked with the what was his name? His name was Dwight Goodman. He was the fire marshal here in Morgan Hill, and we worked with Holiday Estates to help bring the rates down up there. So yes, we did go up there, and I worked side by side with Mr. Goodman, and we just kind of went up there and explained to the insurance companies and the insurance services offices all the steps that the homeowners association takes place and also the fire department takes place to make sure that all these homes have a defensible fire.
Does the insurance company send somebody out to inspect if it's in a high fire?
Absolutely. They are getting to the point where they are flying drones over your houses as well.
Ah, I was wondering what those were.
Yeah, absolutely.
What maps do insurance companies use to determine who they should cover?
What maps? It's from the insurance services office. So the insurance services office provides all the maps for us that we pull our records, and that's how we determine what risks we will take and what rates they are going to have.
I think Laurel wanted to sell you a NHD report. I think that's what I thought. Just kidding.
I get that question all the time when I'm doing classes, and I really don't know that they're all the same. I think a lot of different insurance carriers have different mapping systems and algorithms as to what they'll
And I
cover
don't,
based on losses and so forth.
I was trying to get some material from my district manager, but I do have things like this that will simply show the FAIR Plan policy along with the companion policy, what's covered and what is not.
All right.
So I do have these. I'm trying to get more, and I'm also trying to get stuff on media as well so that I can share it on these meetings.
All right, it's become a more important because if everybody that's here doesn't get it, if you need a loan, you're going to need homeowners insurance. All right, and it's going to need to include fire. And if you can't get it, then you're not going to get a loan.
That's correct.
And I sold a house that was technically in Hudsonville that was in a fire zone. It was on the fault, everything. If you pay cash, you can buy it.
Yeah.
Right, you know, as long as you don't need a loan, but it shrinks the universe of potential buyers. Any other questions that we have from our group? So right now you can still cover, obviously it's good to know in the beginning whether or not you're going to be in a high fire or very high fire zone before you begin the process, because it would be something you want to work on the insurance right now. Right, if you're buying one of those, you want
And
to.
then a new thing, California Fair Plan is now requiring photos within 7 days to even offer a quote. And they want a picture of the address and they want a picture of the house showing the roof.
No. So don't put it off. All right, don't put it off.
So,
Right.
and if you are working on something, let me know. I'll get myself or my team out there so that I can get working on that.
All right, and you can write insurance for not just the city of Morgan Hill, obviously.
That's the entire state of California.
That's why I just wanted you to say that I have people from, there's people from all over here. All right, well, any other questions, any burning desires? This is your last chance. Don't everybody blurt it out at once.
I put the CAL FIRE Live website up for you guys to see. You can, if you're taking a listing and you're kind of, don't use this as a disclosure, it doesn't search APN, and you got to be very careful because, as I'm sure Carlos could testify, you could be living right here in this little right section right here, which is surrounded by, you know, fire zones, and they'll require fire insurance, even though you may not look like you necessarily need it. But you can touch the binoculars here. And you can type in an address. If you wanted to give me an address, I'd be happy to search one for you.
Any of those is fine if you want to demonstrate.
Okay, so look at one in Fremont or Hayward.
How about three? Do you want to type in one? The one in Hayward. How about that?
The Hayward one?
I can give you an address if you want one.
Oh, it's up to you, but I'll just, if you want me to do that.
This
So
is,
you type in your address, you need a complete address, and push the search button, and it will take you straight there into a very honed in. So you can see that one is not in a fire zone, right? But this is CAL FIRE's map. But okay, let's go over here.
we have somebody who's volunteering a location.
Sure, I'd be
You
happy to
zip
do
code?
that for you. Hang on one second. Let me clear this. Okay,
5163 Tip Top Road. I'm not making this up. 3 words.
TIPTOP
Tip Top Road is.
in tip top shape, huh?
It's right, I guess so. And that's in Mariposa.
And what is that zip code?
Shelley, you're gonna have to help us with that. 95338.
So we'll do a little search. And you're right in the center of a moderate zone, but very near this orange, and this pinkish color is high and very high. So FYI, remember what we talked about? Come January of 2024, they're going to add in moderate zones. And this homeowner will have to do an FHDS. Look at all of this. Look at moderate, where it goes to.
Sherry would like the map, and that was the we posted that in a little bit earlier.
And you can write it down. Look at the search engine right here, egis.fire.ca.gov/FHSZ/. Anyone can go and look at their fire mapping and see, you know, what they have mapped. So, but I really wanted to show you the maps because there's a lot more coming in disclosure when it comes to the fire zones and these reports that and the forms that you need to use, because they're adding in moderate. Moderate is all over the state of California. As you can see, there's a lot of it. And also, if you're thinking, oh, they won't need fire, Don't ever mention that to anybody. Look at this little road right here. If you lived over here, do you think you might need fire insurance because you're encapsulated? And there's other areas like that that will look, they're very close to fire zones that are like this one right here that's not mapped. There's an actual zone in Truckee that's not mapped, that's right in the center of town. So this little section right here, I mean, we don't know if there's a house on it or not, but so you got to be careful what you disclose. Just leave it up to the NHD to tell you if it's in a fire zone or not that's mapped by the state.
All right, great stuff. We got a lot of positive comments. I hope you enjoyed this today. You thought real estate was going to be easy, huh? There's always more to know. I want to thank Laurel for doing the presentation today and Carlos for answering questions about the insurance. All of you have received copies of all of our contact information. If you would like more, please reach out to us. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
All right.